Okay, Nuclear Dad Gang, thank you for returning. We are back once again, and we are on episode 10. It's hard to believe I cranked this many out in, I guess it's been 5 days. Yeah, 10 episodes in 5 days. It's been fun. I probably will take a break for a bit after this, but I think 10 episodes is enough to chew on. That's at least 6-7 hours worth of content. Bingeable in a day, bingeable in a weekend, spread it out over a week or two. But I have to get the ball rolling with the magazine and a couple of other things, because Father's Day is coming up, and I got some surprises for you guys. If you're listening to this afterward, I would say that there are either links in the description, or you can always check out the nucleardad.com. There will be a lot of stuff going on, a lot of things you don't want to miss. And I'm doing it all for us, fellas, because the world don't love us, not like we love us. If you're a part of this club, then you are indeed in the league of extraordinary gentlemen. We talked about motivation, productivity. We talked about testosterone. We talked about infidelity and faithfulness. We talked about the danger room. We talked about being dangerous. We talked about being better men. But the one thing that we have not touched on is the code. Every man has to have a code that your life is defined by. And over here, we are monogamous married men. We're dedicated fathers. Whether you do things in your community or not, kudos if you do. If you don't, I understand. Being a husband and father is a full-time job. Sometimes you have to grow into that. Sometimes that's not you. Cool. Maybe you mentor boys in the neighborhood. Maybe you buy all the kids ice cream when the ice cream truck rolls past. Whatever you do, trust me, it's enough. Don't feel bad. If you want to do more, then do more. But if you don't have the financial or the emotional or the mental capability of doing more right now, don't feel bad. You do what you can, when you can, where you are, with what you have. That's what this is about. No judgment. This is about us uplifting us. So we're going to keep this ball rolling. We're going to talk about the code that every man must live by. And some of us are a little more unscrupulous than others. I like that word. Some of us are a little darker than others. Some of us don't live by this code. Some of us are backstabbers. Some of us are, as the kids say, haters. Some of us are jealous. Some of us are envious of others. And those are all things internally that people have to work on. I'm not judging. I just want to make sure that the people that are listening to this, who are looking to join this way of life, this code of life, this league of extraordinary gentlemen, and these principles, understand that it's all about your integrity. It's all about how honest you're being with yourself and with your wife and with your children. And we don't always have good days. Some days we're tired, we're frustrated. We just want to sit back and maybe take a nap. Maybe watch something funny. Maybe take a drive. Maybe go out and get something to eat by ourselves. Maybe go get something to drink with the boys. We all have those days. But that's what the danger room is for, right? Hopefully you get a chance to use it more often than not. And even if you only get to use it once a month, maximize that time. But today we're going to be talking about the King's Code. We're going to model ourselves after kings. And not just any kings. Not those guys that rule with an iron fist and they have the finest silk garments and, gold adornment, and the peasants have nothing. And they're starving and they're hungry and the morale is low. No, we're talking about kings with a great, mighty, and flourishing kingdom whose subjects love them and adore them. And your kingdom is your household, gentlemen. And of course, you got your queen. You have your royal subjects, which is your children, maybe your pets. Maybe you can train that goldfish. Maybe your dog can sit when you tell him to. Whatever the case. It's the King's Code. The Nuclear Dad Blogcast is sponsored by Family Man Magazine and thenucleardad.com. Family Man Magazine will be available this Father's Day, June 19, 2022. All right. Now, this episode, we're going to do a little different. I'm not going to have any music with words in it. This is going to be all soundscapes. I want you to feel royal when you hear it. I want you to feel kingly. I want this to be one of those episodes that you go back to time after time and you get a little bit more from it. Just like a movie you see that you love, you watch it again and again, you hear something new, you see something new, you notice something different in the background. I want this to be one of those episodes. It's episode 10, so this is a big milestone for me. So we're going to get right into the information. I'm on integralpsychology.org. It says A Journey from Boys to Men. Now, they talk about 4 different male archetypes. And one is a king/stabilizer, one is a warrior/activator, one is a magician/clarifier, one is a lover/unifier. And then they get into the different archetypes in their fullness. Now, the warrior activator, it implores you to do something that scares you. Be more decisive. Quit seeking exits. Maybe follow through. Find your core values. Have a plan and a purpose. Strengthen your resilience. Find out who you are loyal to. Establish and live via a non-negotiable term. Compete. Strengthen your habits via discipline and routine. Adopt a minimalist attitude. Take up physical discipline, i.e. martial arts. Now for the clarifier/magician, commit to lifelong learning. Meditate, create more, consume less. Work with your hands, take part in rites of passage. Find a mentor, become a mentor. Create a Sangha, which is basically a community of Buddhist monks and nuns. We follow Christ over here, so create your own space that is under the authority of God, which is your family. Create a sacred space inside your home. We already talked about the danger room. Now for the king/stabilizer, leave a legacy, develop practical wisdom, become a mentor, find a mentor, develop the virtue of order, break away from your mother, develop traits of true leadership, establish your core values, that's on there twice, develop a life plan, protect the sanctity of your ideas. Again, danger room. Become decisive, avoid corruption, live with integrity. Now for the lover/unifier, cultivate the virtue of moderation. Become fully present. Find the center of your bliss. Be spontaneous. Work out what your lover needs. And then they talk about the boy psychology / the healthy man psychology. Now in the boy psychology, they say, I want a mother. I take no responsibility for my actions. I believe I am immortal. I am the center of the universe. Power is for my benefit. I want it all for me, and I seek acknowledgement. Now, the healthy man psychology suggests I want a relationship with a woman. I take full responsibility for my actions. I know I am immortal. I am just part of the universe. Power is for the good of all. I share with my community, and I seek that which I believe in. I think all of these are great takeaways that you can incorporate. All get a pen and paper, listen to this again, write these things down, because I think all of these things can be meshed together for you to be the better person. And I'm actually going to come up with something from this list, because I think it's no one size fits all. We're all complex. You know, some people, they meditate and they protect and they want to leave a legacy and they're decisive and they're spontaneous. So the whole warrior, clarifier, king, lover, this can be all one person. These all can be aspects of you. So I mean, I think it's a good list. I think it's a really good list. But I believe that it all can be put together. And I mean, there's more of that. I found something else that says the king, warrior, magician, lover is a classic manosphere staple for men looking into self-development. It's a book from 1990. It mixes solid psychology with religion, myth, and self-development practices to teach men how to find their own version of masculinity. Again, find your own version. You don't got to go by everything this thing says, but I do think it's a good place to start. So I'm going to bookmark both of these websites because I want to dig more into this and come up with something practical that we all can use for the betterment of what we're creating here. Okay, and we're right back at it. Now, I'm on a website called the Art of Manliness. I love this website. I jumped on this website when I was in a bad relationship. A lot of my knowledge about women and myself has come from being in bad relationships. Hard times is when you grow. Pressure makes diamonds. It's a fact of nature. So on this website, they actually go into these archetypes, and I'm on the part about the king, the 4 archetypes of the mature masculine, and this is about the king. Now, they have covered the actual book, The King, the Warrior, the Magician, and the Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. It says, if you haven't already, I highly recommend reading the introduction to the series. Also, keep in mind that these posts are a little more esoteric than our normal fare and are meant to be contemplated and thoughtfully reflected on. Now, the King archetype is one of the most important, or is the most important of the 4 mature masculine archetypes. Just as a good king in mythological stories is often something of a Renaissance man, a good warrior, magician, and lover, the king archetype incorporates all 3 mature masculine archetypes in perfect harmony. Exactly what I said. A man who accesses the king archetype in its fullness will also have access to warrior, the magician, and the lover archetypes. Yeah, it makes sense. For this reason, the king archetype is typically the last of the mature masculine archetypes to power up in a man's life. In this way, it is truly the crown of other archetypes, the energy that gives a man a sense of his full godlike potential. I mean, we were created in his image, but I don't want to say we're godlike. But we are children of the Most High, yes indeed. The characteristics of the king in his fullness: he is centered, he is decisive, he lives with integrity, he protects his realm, he provides order, he creates and inspires creativity in others, he blesses the lives of others, he leaves a legacy. Now, you have the shadows of the archetype, which is the tyrant and the weakling. Now, the tyrant, unlike the king archetype, which creates and blesses others, the tyrant seeks to destroy and tear down. Plagued by narcissism, he really does think that he sits at the center of the universe. The tyrant wrongly believes that power is finite, and he has a scarcity mentality. He doesn't understand the truth that power and influence actually increase the more you share with others. Thus, the burden of maintaining his fragile illusion of absolute power makes him very insecure. Any threat to his authority and supremacy enrages him and causes him to lash out with abuse, physically, emotionally, or mentally. While the tyrant isn't viewing others as a threat and putting them in their place, he sees them as objects to exploit for his own gain. He's willing to push his friends, family, employees under the bus in order to further his goals. We see the tyrant manifest itself in this manner when businessmen or politicians further their own career at the expense of people under their stewardship. And then you have the weakling. The weakling is the passive shadow of the King Archetype. Instead of taking control of his life and resolutely making decisions, a man is possessed by the weakling, often abdicates his throne to others, handing over power, responsibility, and control of his life to them. This is the man who, though grown up, still lets his mother or father make his decisions for him. This is the man who knows what? This is the man who basically bows down to his boss or his wife at every whim. I don't know what that word is. I don't even think it's English. This is also the man who was abused in some way as a child. When he becomes an adult, he ascends into a position of power. He relishes the opportunity to turn the tables and become the bully himself. Now that I'm in charge, things are going to change around here. Sounds like a nerd. But even in a position of power, the weakling's insecurity gets the best of him. He becomes paranoid that people are out to get him, and they often are because he's such a jerk. This paranoia leads him to become even more controlling and cruel. Moore believes that the weakling and tyrant shadows work in tandem with each other. It's very rare that a man is ruled by one and not the other. Underneath every blustering tyrant is a scared weakling, and underneath every cowering weakling is a tyrant waiting to explode. That was very interesting. And again, it's like I said, the king is the amalgamation of all of those other archetypes, which is what we must be, gentlemen. Our sons and our daughters are looking at us to be this. Our wives are looking at us to be this. And it is up to us. Once you get your motivation down, you figure out your game plan, you figure out your passion, you get your danger room set up, I want you to work on bringing that king outward. He's been in there bubbling. If he's not out already, he's been in there bubbling, just waiting for his chance to crack through the surface. And I think you should let him do it. All right, we're going to take a walk back through history and look at some of the 10 alleged Mad Monarchs. So as tabloid fodder for the ages, Mad Monarchs have been the focal point of fascination and controversy for as long as there have been human rulers. This is from history.com. Updated 2018. Original article 2014. The first on the list is Nebuchadnezzar. It says the granddaddy of all mad kings is King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian ruler whose first-person account of a 7-year descent into animal-like insanity is one of the most fascinating sections of the Old Testament book of Daniel. According to that account, the arrogant king was struck down for his disbelief in the Hebrews' God, leaving his place and living in the wild. The biblical story of Nebuchadnezzar's madness became the framework through which royal insanity was seen in the Judeo-Christian world. Second on the list is Caligula, Emperor of Rome. Topping even his nephew Nero for the crown of cruelest and craziest Roman emperor, Caligula was known for his lavish projects, his sadism, and his eccentricity. He once had his army construct a 2-mile floating bridge so he could gallop along it on his horse. In another episode, he ordered his troops to plunder the sea by gathering shells in their helmets. Tall and hairy, Caligula is said to have banned the mention of goats in his presence, but practiced facial contortions to better terrify his subjects. He built a lavish house for his horse, Enacius, and attempted to appoint the steed to the high office of council, though he was assassinated before he could complete the promotion. Third on the list, Henry VIII of England. Next on the list, the Zengi Emperor of China. I don't want to read all of this stuff, but you can look these guys up. Number 5, Joan of Castile. Number 6, Ivan the Terrible. I'll read him because I know that name. The first Tsar of all Russia, Ivan IV, whose nickname in Russia implies imposing or threatening more than evil, expanded Moscow's influence into the lands of the ancient Eastern Europe Federation known as the Kievan Rus. Ivan promulgated wide-ranging reforms, centralized administration, and created the black-clad forerunners of Russia's deadliest secret police. He took great pleasure in bringing members of the nobility to heel through torture and sadistic executions. Fed up with rule, Ivan attempted to resign in 1564, but was convinced to return a year later. He went on to create his own private fiefdom, the Oprykina, through which he exerted total control of as much as 1/3 of the Muscovite realms. In 1581, Ivan murdered his own son and heir, striking him with a pointed staff in a fit of rage. Despite his foibles, though, Ivan's terribleness made him one of the most respected czars in Russian history. You should study statecraft and see how the men who are the most cruel are the most rewarded. I'll leave that there. 8 on the list is George III of England. 9 on the list is Carlota of Mexico. Let's see what she did. It would be hard to imagine a stranger life than the one led by Carlota, the first and only Habsburg Empress of Mexico. Born Charlotte of Belgium, she was the daughter of King Leopold I and the first cousin of Queen Victoria. At a young age, she was married to Maximilian, then the Archduke of Austria, and went to live with him in a castle in Italy. In 1864, a group of Mexican arch-conservatives colluded with Francis Napoleon III to depose the liberal president Benito Juarez and appoint Maximilian Emperor of Mexico. Maximilian and Carlota arrived in Veracruz, backed by French troops and conservative supporters, and made their way to Mexico City. For 3 years, the royal couple did their best to win over the Mexican people, enthusiastically speaking Spanish as they promoted liberal agendas including land reform and better policies toward the country's native communities. In doing so, though, they lost their conservative backers. After the French withdrew their troops in 1866, Maximilian and Carlota's empire was left teetering. Carlota was sent to Europe to regain support from the French and the Pope. When she failed at this, she suffered a mental breakdown and was institutionalized. The reinstated Benito Juarez ordered Maximilian's execution in 1867. Carlota lived on another 6 decades, never regaining her sanity and remaining sequestered in her family's 14th century castle in Belgium. So she wasn't bad, she just lost her mind because she didn't know what she was doing. Ludwig II of Bavaria. He's number 10. So these are some bad kings, right? And I didn't read them all, so they didn't seem all bad, but kings have notoriously been bad throughout history. Some have been great. But I actually want to get in the next segment, I want to get into some good kings and what makes a good king. We've read some of the archetypes, but I want to bring it from another source. All right. BibleStudyTools.com. Kings and kingship. The term king and kingship are common biblical words, occurring over 2,500 times in the Old Testament and 275 times in the New Testament. The terms are applied not only to human rulers, but also to God. The concept of kingship of God is regarded by many scholars as so basic to biblical revelation that it is viewed as an organizing theme for all scripture. In general, the words Melech and Basileus designated the person who holds supreme authority over a nation or city. In the Old Testament, the most numerous references to king and kingship occur in the narratives dealing with the period of the united and divided kingdoms of ancient Israel. Saul, David, and Solomon were the kings who ruled over a united Israelite kingdom. After Solomon's death, the kingdom divided into northern Israel and southern Judah. Then a long succession of kings in both Israel, which had 19 kings, and Judah, 19 kings and one queen, ran from 931 BC until 721 BC in the north, and so that's 200 years in the north, and 586 BC in the south. So that was pretty good. 200 years in the north, 400 years in the south, roughly. Much of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles describe matters pertaining to the lives and reigns of these kings. This, however, does not mean that reference to kingship is limited to narrative sections in the Old Testament. In fact, significant sections of the writings of the prophets and poets are involved in the actions of the various kings of Israel and Judah. The use of king and kingship, however, is not limited to the occupants of the thrones in Samaria and Jerusalem. Reference is also found to numerous foreign kings whose activities affected Israel in some way. But more important, there is a strong and conspicuous emphasis on the kingship of God, the great king, who rules over his people. And they give some scriptural verses. God's kingship, however, contrasts with that of Israel's rulers in that God's rule is not limited to the nation of Israel. While he is king over his people in a special sense, by virtue of his covenantal relationship with them, his kingship is at the same time universal, extending to all nations and peoples and even the natural environment. This juxtaposition of divine and human kingship in the Old Testament period presented ancient Israel with a duality of sovereigns. God was the great king who ruled the universe as well as his people, Israel. He had not only delivered Israel from bondage in Egypt and taken them to himself to be a kingdom of priests, which you can find in Exodus, but he was sovereign beyond Israel's borders as the ruler over all of nature and history. Yet, in the course of time, Israel also had her own human kings, the rulers in Jerusalem or Samaria, who exercised their royal power to govern the nation. This duality of sovereigns was the source of one of the major theological problems in the Old Testament period. How was Israel to understand the relationship between their obligation to Yahweh, the divine king, on the one hand, and their obligation to the human king on the other hand? What was the role of the human king in ancient Israel? And to what extent was that role realized? What conditions gave rise to the idea of the coming of a future messianic king who would someday establish peace and justice on all of earth? It is important to understand the way in which the Old Testament presents the relationship between the divine and human kingship. Contrary to the idea of certain scholars, the Old Testament does not suggest that the idea of kingship of Yahweh was a projection derived from the human institution. It is not warranted to assert, as some have, that the title of king was not ascribed to Yahweh prior to the time of the Israelite monarchy. To do this requires the late dating of explicit statements of Yahweh's kingship in texts such as Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Judges, and Samuel, 1 Samuel. To do this also denies the close relationship that exists between the establishment of the Sinai covenant and the acknowledgement of Yahweh's kingship over Israel. Parallels in literary structure between the Sinai covenant and the certain international treaties drawn up by the kings of the Hittite Empire of the 4th century BC show that in the Sinai covenant, Yahweh assumes the role of the great king and Israel, that of his vassal. All of this suggests very clearly that Israel recognized Yahweh as her great king long before kingship was established in Jerusalem. This recognition has caused other contemporary scholars to suggest that the establishment of human kingship in Israel was a rebellion against the divine rule and represented an alien, paganizing development in the social structure of ancient Israel. For these scholars, the establishment of the monarchy represented the return to the social model of the old Bronze Age paganism of the Canaanites. and a rejection of religious foundations derived from the Mosaic formulations of the Sinai covenant. This approach, however, does violence to the many positive biblical statements concerning God's design for the institution of kingship in the context of his sovereign plan for the redemption of his people, and ultimately for the universe triumph of peace and justice on earth. Kingship in Israel was not unanticipated. God had even provided for it in a revelation. Abraham was told that kings would arise amongst his descendants. Jacob said that royalty would arise from the tribe of Judah. Moses provided for the eventual rise of kingship in Israel when he gave them the law of the king, as part of the renewal of the covenant in the plains of Moab just before Israel's entrance into the promised land. So it is clear that in God's purpose, it was right and proper for Israel to have a king. To question this erodes the institutional basis of the messianic hope that arose in connection with the failure of Israel's kings to function as God had instructed. The question of the Old Testament apparently... Okay, listen, I'm not going to read no more, because I think I'm losing people. I'm losing myself. I understand what it's saying, but it's going on. What I was trying to get to was the fact that we are kings as husbands of our household. If you have the same faith as me, I can't tell you about other faiths because I don't study them. But if you have the same faith as me, then in a pyramidal structure, it's God first, it's the husband, then it's the wife. God rules over the husband as the husband rules over the wife. Now, I don't mean ruling over the wife in the same sense that God rules over the husband or the man. Christianity is very patriarchal. I'm not going to argue that. And I'm not going to have a discussion about how it's unfair to women, because women were not treated like property by the righteous men in the Bible. Yeah, they may have had multiple wives and multiple children. We don't do that nowadays. But I plan to treat my wife. I do treat my wife as an equal. I don't stand over her in the sense that I own her and I govern her every move. But she does recognize my authority in a relationship and in the house, because kings are supposed to lead. And she's fine with letting me lead. And I'm fine with leading and taking suggestion when I need it, because her and I are in a partnership. And that's what I want us to have, man. I want us to have divine partnerships with our spouses and divine leadership over our households. And I want us to create our kingdom the way God would have seen it done. Righteous, just, loving, with integrity, with empathy and compassion. That's what I'm getting to. That's the point of me reading what I just read. And as you can hear, I'm getting tired. It's about 3 a.m, which means I'm at my quota, but we are going to continue this. So what I want you to focus on is what we said in the beginning, the King's Code. Every man has to have a code in which he stands on and he does not compromise. And it could be different for each one of you. I know what mine is, but I'm going to flesh some things out physically that we can actually look at, we can work with, and apply in our lives in real time. So with that being said, gentlemen, I want you to stay focused. I want you to stay vigilant. I want you to remember your mission. I want you to stay the course. And most importantly, I want you to stay cool. The Nuclear Dad Blogcast is sponsored by Family Man Magazine and thenucleardad.com. Family Man Magazine will be available this Father's Day, June 19, 2022.